My name is Alexandra Pringle, and I'm a publisher at Bloomsbury Publishing, and we are the very, very proud publishers of this wonderful book, which has just come out to what we call rapturous applause. And you can't often say that about a book, sadly, but with this one you can. It's very difficult to describe Roopa because she is so many different things. And she leaves your head spinning with what she has achieved and what she is achieving in her life. But with this book, the publication of this book, which is an account of the first 40 days of being a junior doctor on the front line when COVID broke out. And I will just quote from one review from the Guardian newspaper that says, "Blistering," which I think is an incredible word to describe this book. "Defiant, uncompromising honesty drives every page. Her memoir is startlingly honed and devastatingly good." And I think the word devastating is also very, very important in this book. And the book begins with a terrible personal loss for Roopa, which is the death of her beloved sister to breast cancer, her very early and shocking death. And Roopa is reeling with grief and little knowing that literally around the corner the pandemic was about to break out. And Roopa is a writer. She's a very successful writer who's published many different sorts of books, a teacher, a mother of 4 children. I mean, as if that isn't enough, she decided, and I want to ask her about this, to train as a doctor. And her life took an extraordinary different turn, but she could never know that she was going to be doing this in the arms of a pandemic. So this account, which she wrote in real time, pretty much, yes, wasn't it? In real time, night after night, after incredibly long shifts at the hospital, she'd come back, put her children to bed, and then she had to write, and she wrote through the night. And so it has an urgency and an uncompromising clarity and beauty, which leaves you reeling and literally breathless. And I wonder, Roopa, if you'd like to start by maybe reading a little bit,
sure.
So that we can have a feeling of the prose, which is really remarkable.
Wow, thank you for that blistering introduction. As well, Alexandra. I just want to, sorry, can you all hear me? Can I just check that the mic's okay? And I just want to say how wonderful it is to be back here at the Lahore Literary Festival launching this book, because I remember sitting here 3 years ago when I was just about to sit my final exams in medicine, so I was talking about my novels, and I actually had my textbooks in the green room and was studying ahead of finals, and I met Alexandra actually on a panel there. Yeah. So it feels like I'm kind of turning a little bit of a circle.
That's how we became her publishers, as we dated in Lahore. So it's very much thanks to Lahore that we're here with this book.
So I'm going to read, as Alexandra says, I wrote this every day. The prologue is a section I wrote a couple of weeks before lockdown, and then that was a section that I really wrote for myself about my sister, to try and kind of understand a little bit about her death and to try and make some sense of it for myself. And then after that, from day 0, the day before lockdown, and every day since, I just wrote it every day. So it is very much in real time. Alexandra's been very kind about the quality of the writing, but it is quite fragmentary, and I let it stay that way in the editing process. I didn't change anything because I wanted it to be a true account, a real account, and to not polish away what was unpleasant, or to disguise or try and comfort or conceal with anything that might be a lie within this story. So this is chapter 5, which is called Scribes, and it's written on day 7 of lockdown. It's day 7 of lockdown. You've stolen some time to write at the end of the day, but the clocks have gone back and you're too shattered and keep falling asleep at the keyboard. There's nothing much to write, but you feel you owe a record to someone. You don't know why. The record's already being kept between the news networks and Twitter. You can't stop yourself doom scrolling once the children are in bed. You sit on the floor in the hall, your back to the radiator where their school clothes are drying, surrounded by their clutter of lunch boxes, school bags, trainers, chunky black shoes, lit by your laptop on the first stair. The kitchen and the sitting room seem too cold and dark. 3 NHS doctors died from COVID-19. That's being reported today. They all have names like yours. Funny foreign names is what the elderly white patients say. With desperate helplessness, trying to read your name badge, trying to remember the name of the funny foreign doctor they just saw. We all look alike to them. Brown doctor, black hair, blue scrubs. The Prime Minister now has the virus, and you don't know how they justify testing him for it, if he only has mild symptoms. At least the future king is elderly and met criteria. The PM is the idiot who told the nation to take it on the chin just a few weeks ago. Not your PM. The majority voted for him in a landslide of irresponsibility because he gives good caricature. Democracy is the tyranny of the majority. That was John Stuart Mill. It's long past midnight. You're getting up for your shift in 6 hours. One of your colleagues says that she's scared to come into work. You wonder why you aren't scared. You have 4 school-aged children at home. You have so much to lose. You can't stop yourself writing. You shouldn't write. Your daily reality is the same as it is for everyone who works in a hospital. Disease, vulnerability, death. But now you find yourself at the front line of an unprecedented global pandemic. A front seat in history. Although history is always happening somewhere, we just don't pay attention to it if it's far away, unfilmed, unreported. This happened right here. It is forced on every screen. It is every news report, every post and tweet. But somehow you barely noticed it happening. You were too busy doing your job. When a friend in Oxford didn't hug you, you thought he was being precious. When he asked you your opinion on the pandemic, citing the Italian trajectory, La Quarantena, you thought he was being alarmist. You thought the word pandemic was overkill. Do you remember when your friend of Chinese origin coughed on a tube carriage and cleared it, and you thought the escaping passengers were bigots? Do you remember when the old lady asked loudly in the cafe if anyone was Italian before she'd sit down, and you called her out as an old racist? You still think they were wrong, but you were too. And now everyone is 2 meters from everyone else when they're not locked down in their homes. You suppose everyone's writing a book during lockdown. They're writing about isolation, about domestic violence. Maybe there are comic romances about mismatched couples who find themselves trapped together. They're writing about being perched and twittering in a gilded cage, their phones providing a pocket-sized window on a wider world while birds fly free outside, soaring in great fluid circles over fields and seafront. The birds own your town now. Someone clever is probably writing a version from the virus's perspective, in experimental blank verse and the first person plural. Doctors are too busy working to write books, even if they were the sort who wanted to write. But those who do so are served with, "Who the hell do you think you are?" Reporting on your experiences, on patient experience, is considered bad taste. But you're persisting in this account to offer it to some future self who might forget, some future other who lived through this too. The experience of disease is subjective. Everyone who looks it in the face sees someone different. Your individual experience matters. A silver thread of your own truth wound around it. You will write, a little, a lot. You can unspool this experience and share it. Maybe today, tonight, in these early hours, sitting in the dark of your hallway, you're the scribe for your tribe. On this 7th day of lockdown, you get an email that 4 patients have died so far from COVID. Among the 3 hospitals in your trust, among the thousands of patients, that doesn't seem too bad. But then you read about those 3 NHS doctors who have died. There have been talk about them in the hospital. Fearful, mutinous mutterings in the mess. In the quiet corners at the end of long corridors. The first British clinician deaths in the UK due to the virus. One is originally from Pakistan, like you. 1 GP, 2 surgeons. The sort of people who like to say this sort of thing out loud say they shouldn't have been described as British. They're brown, from somewhere else. It doesn't matter how many times you'd say you're British. That questioning, where are you from? No, where are you really from? Where are your parents from? No, where are they really from? Is relentless, comically so almost. The dead doctors, the brown doctors, from somewhere else, once upon a time. You know there's no point arguing or even replying. It's like dousing a fire with petrol. But you're thinking, how much more do you have to give? When do you get to belong? A life's work devoted to caring for others. A life, their lives, given away. If they had the proper protective equipment, it wouldn't have happened. How much more should they have been given? When do you get to feel safe? You had no scrubs for your last on-call shift in A&E. You wore leggings. You stole a scrub top from theatres. They show you the COVID gear that's been issued for the COVID bay on your ward. It's just a regular surgical mask. A gown. No sealed mask, tested with the foul smell sprayed in the outside air that they did in the training. No hood, no visor, nothing to cover your hair, nothing for your shoes. You'll walk straight into the virus. You'll soak it up in your hair like a sponge. You're going to get it too. It's inevitable. You're surprised you haven't got it already. You've been more exposed than anyone you know, face to face and hand on hand with patients who've gone on to test positive. You take that knowledge home every night. Every day you walk back in the wind, along the cabbage fields, sometimes in the sunshine, now the days are lengthening. You think that might help lift the viral load from your clothes. Every day you strip your clothes and shoes and socks as soon as you shut the front door behind you. You squash your clothes in a plastic bag and hang it high where it can't be touched at the entrance to your house. Your stethoscope, your ID cards, which hang around your neck, have already been wiped, stuffed in a plastic packet in your handbag. Every day you wash before you touch your children. You know how to do it properly. You show them that you are doing it. Every day your hands are cracked and dry. You hug the children, and then you dress.
Thank you. That was lovely. So, Roopa, you say something I think incredibly telling in this book, which is that you make big decisions too lightly. And I was fascinated by that. And that included deciding to get married on your 3rd date, which actually my parents did as well. And I always thought, I was brought up thinking that was the way to do it. So how did you come to make the decision to become a doctor?
That was a decision that once I finally did it, seemed to be taken lightly, but which was a long time coming, actually. I talked about this in one of the earlier sessions, but I wanted to be a doctor from when I was very young. And I wasn't really encouraged in that direction. My parents were in the arts. I was very good at the arts. And I wasn't from any kind of background where we were encouraged into the sciences. I wasn't a British citizen when I was younger. I was on one of those rolling visitor visas that got renewed every 6 months from the age of 6 months through till 16 years old. So going to a state school wasn't really an option where I could choose my own A-levels. And I actually got a scholarship to an excellent private school in London which was the only way possible because my dad had left the family by that stage. My mum was a teacher raising 3 kids on a single salary. And I had to sit an entrance exam for this school, and I'm stronger in the arts, so I came top in art subjects. Those were the A-levels that I did, and I went on to do PPE at Oxford. So even though I'd always really wanted to do medicine, there was no way that you do medicine with a degree in politics, philosophy, and economics. So it wasn't until they opened graduate entry to medicine some 10 years later, when I had children who were tiny, that it became an option. And I think it was a point when I was publishing my 6th book where I thought, if I'm ever going to do it now. And then it became a very easy decision once I just made up my mind, because for years my books, my literary fiction, had been a way of exploring my interest in medicine. I'd written about fertility, I'd written about autism, I'd written about bipolar disorder, I'd written about the effects of aging, the aging process on our identities, about our fragilities as we age, about what happens to us as we undergo disease. So it was a way of finally doing that. And I had no science A-levels or science background, so I actually delivered my 6th novel, The Good Children, which is actually set here in Lahore. And I took books out of the library. I've talked before in an earlier session about the importance of libraries, which were in biology, physics, and chemistry. I taught myself for a few months, A-level physics, chemistry, and biology, up to about 1st year undergrad. I sat the graduate entry exam for medicine along with all the postgrads and the science graduates, and I came in the top 3% in the country, and I got my place in medical school. So that's how I did it. So once I made the decision and I just got those books out of the library, it was actually quite easy.
I don't think there's anything easy about what you did. And how do you feel about the bit of you that's the novelist? Do you feel that being a doctor and a novelist can coexist?
To be honest, I never thought I'd write a book like this, which was bringing, like I said, I'd kind of tried to explore my interest in medicine through my writing of fiction. And once I was in training to be a doctor, I started, and I had my children who were getting older into an age where they could read themselves. I started writing children's fiction for them, which took into account kind of my medical interests. And I never thought I would write a medical memoir, so to speak. I never thought I'd be bringing together my 2 worlds in this way. I never thought they'd collide like this. I very much thought that what I did in the hospital would stay in the hospital, and that I would continue to write fiction and it would be on the side. And in fact, shortly after I'd qualified, shortly after my sister had died, this pandemic, it just fell around us like a flood. And I think, some people write because they really love to write, and I think some writers write because we just must. It's our way of making sense of the world. And even though I say a little bit in that extract, even though I probably shouldn't, it feels like it's indulging some kind of bad habit, some disease, some addiction, I still did. And it was my way of trying to kind of understand what was happening. So perhaps my literary training meant I couldn't maybe realize or properly account or maybe unwind from myself everything that I was going through unless I wrote it down on paper. Maybe it's a form of exorcism, actually. So this first account, I'm sure it feels like it when you read it. I wasn't really writing it for an audience. If I was, I'd have been a lot more friendly in my tone. I was
a lot of anger in the book.
And it surprised me actually reading back on it almost 2 years later from the writing of it, because I'm not generally an angry, sweary person. In the hospital, I am known for being the helpful doctor, the one that you can come to if you need a hand, the one who who will also always help out the juniors or the nurses, who will support people. But in this book, I'm furious, and I'm sweary, and I'm shouty, and I guess I'm uncompromising in this kind of position, in the unfairness of this position that we'd been put in. And I think there was a lack of acknowledgement, really, in these early days, at least, of the extra risks that we were going through as doctors. And I think that I needed to say that as well in some way. My hospital, like many hospitals in the UK, have clinicians like myself who are far more diverse than the population we serve. And we were actually at risk from our patients. There's no two ways about it. And yet we still turned up every day. And it's not that we were fearless. People will sort of imply, oh, you were soldiers, you were going out the pandemic, you were brave. We weren't. I think there's more bravery when you're scared and you still go in. I think we're all scared, but we still went in day after day, because if we didn't, who would? You know, who would look after our patients? Who would service our hospitals? So it wasn't really, you know, a choice. It wasn't really something to thank us for. We did it. You know, I write because I must. I worked because I had to. It really wasn't a decision almost. It's something that, you know, you felt, you know, you have to just step up and do your job.
And women, of course, have over centuries had to write or be artists in the interstices of their other lives. This is something that has happened over centuries and still happens. So it's like with you, the children are in bed. And I have a friend who's a painter. She's dead now. And she would go into her studio at midnight and paint through the night. It was the only way that she could do it. And you would have thought that by now somehow we'd sorted it out, but we haven't.
Yeah, I think, to be honest, writing this book was even lonelier in a way than writing my other work, because my writing has always been fairly invisible to my children, because I write before they wake up at 5 in the morning. I write after they go to bed at midnight. And for years, my books were literary fiction, so even if they saw them in a library, they weren't books that they could really take in and read. They might see a representation of themselves on the cover and the acknowledgements, but it was sort of invisible to them. And then my work as a doctor was also invisible to them, because there was no way that I could go back and unburden anyone in my family on what had happened during the day. There was no way I could talk about it. And my colleagues, we didn't want to talk about it either. It was hard enough, really, to live through that time, to have... when I was redeployed to the COVID ward, I remember one Friday morning when 4 patients died in a row, one after another, and despite all our best medical care, despite all our work with ventilation, despite everything we could do, and we were wrung out. And there's no way you can take that home and unburden your already terrified... My husband was terrified of me working in the hospital, and he actually made it quite clear that he thought it was quite selfish of me to continue to work. So that put a huge burden on our marriage. My children weren't terrified because they didn't know the truth until I got COVID myself. But when I coughed, there was this flurry of fear at home and trying to stay away from me.
And your son and you had a conversation about if you were to die, what your funeral would be.
Yeah. They asked me what kind of cake I'd want served, because they know cake's important to me, and they didn't want to mess that up. And I was thinking, well, it's quite terrifying. I was thinking, oh my God, you're monsters. You're so heartless to actually be talking about this. But then I realized that they'd just gone through my sister dying. They'd seen that her children had to go through my sister's funeral just a few weeks before. And they had already learned the hard way that mothers die, and sometimes mothers die young. And they'd seen it with their cousins, they'd seen it with my sister, and the reality that they might see it with me, it was there, it was out there, and you couldn't really take that away. So it was hard. At first I was thinking, my God, this is merciless. But at the same time, I was because none of us knew what would happen. I was on the same shift, I mentioned in the book actually, as one of my nurses in the acute medical unit, which is a unit right next to A&E, where we admitted a lady with a cough who had lung cancer, and that we thought that was the cause for her cough. And we both looked after this patient. Amy had looked after, and I'd looked after her, and I'd percussed her spine to check for metastases. I was looking after her in case she had neutropenic sepsis. Amy had taken her observations. It turned out this lady was coughing not because of her lung cancer, but because she had COVID. And Amy got COVID from her, and I didn't. And Amy died 3 weeks later, and I didn't. And she was young. She was in her 30s. She had 3 children. And we talked on that shift about how we were both late to our respective careers, how she was late to nursing and I was late to medicine. And we joked about, doing things late. And then that happened. And we all really truly thought that, we could die on the next shift. I remember one of the respiratory consultants saying out loud, you kind of wonder who you've pissed off in the hospital and who's going to save that ventilator for you. It was a really strange time, and it was a very odd mentality. So it was something you tried not to take home, but at the same time, I said, my children asked when I was ill, they asked about what I would want to happen at my funeral. I think because they knew that I'd just gone through my sister's, and I remember being kind of upset at how I mentioned in the book about how some people had treated it like a party, and I hadn't got over, you know, how it was to lose someone and how quickly they disappeared. So yeah, it was a strange, strange time.
We've got only a few minutes, so I want, yes, any questions?
So I'll make it very quick because you don't have the time. So I was constantly reminded of Virginia Woolf's essay, A Room of One's Own. And it seems that 100 years later, what's changed at one level is that women have a lot more access to professions like medicine, which is great and empowering. But things haven't quite changed when you want to express yourself. But my question is that do you feel that despite all these challenges, in some kind of a perverse way, this entire hardship adds even more resonance to your prose? So in other words, if things were better, which they ought to be, and I hope they are in terms of availability of time and all that, perhaps some of that, I mean, I have Urdu and Persian words to describe what I want to say, what Orhan Pamuk calls huzn, this deep felt need to write at one level, that would not have existed if you did not have it so challenging?
I think we definitely learn a lot about ourselves in a crisis, and we learn a lot about who we are, how we behave, and what we can do. And I think you either swim or you sink, don't you? And so perhaps I remember someone actually sent me what I think was intended to be a really kind email saying, "I've read your book. I'm so sorry you had to suffer like this to write your masterpiece." Which is odd because I have struggled for years and years writing books that are 130,000 words, and this was literally something I vomited out in 40 days. I describe it like Pollock on the page. It's just this emotional outpouring. So a masterpiece implies craft, and instead this was about me just getting very much in touch with what was happening to me emotionally. And the reason and towards the end of it, I started thinking, is this something I could share? Is this something I should share? And that's a difficult question for, like I say, doctors who share their experiences are vilified, to be honest, at least where I am. And on the other hand, I thought, no, I don't want this sugar-coated. I want people to know what we went through. I want it shared. I want it talked about. And I want it understood. So perhaps extraordinary times of hardship force us to make those decisions that I might otherwise have been too timid to make. I don't know if it made me a better writer, but it did make me think of one thing, is that for all my work in medicine, saving lives, which actually I can say hand on heart I have done throughout this pandemic, and sometimes however futile it felt sometimes, whether you were just saving someone one day at a time, that yes, doctors save lives, but I have learnt through this lockdown with what happened with my children and my family is that however much we save lives, it is the arts that keep our lives worth living. And that's why festivals like this and togetherness and sharing of empathy and stories are so important. So I think it has taught me that as well, that this moment of crisis has taught me that yes, what we do in the medical field is important, but what we do in terms of feeding our souls and our empathy and connecting with each other is really important too.
Thank you. I think that's I think we have time for one more question. There's one there, and then we need to move away.
Thank you for moderating, and thank you for the amazing reading and sharing. I was wondering if you could talk about your process of moving from literary fiction to memoir in terms of writing. And I don't know if the whole book is in second person, but what that decision was like, or that process of writing in second person was. And yeah, I guess back to that literary fiction to memoir. I imagine having a background in literary fiction was helpful for writing memoir, but also maybe there are a lot of limitations writing memoir compared to literary fiction.
To be honest, I've got friends who've written beautiful memoir, and it had never occurred to me to do the same. Perhaps I just didn't feel that I had a personal story that could be told in that way. And it's very exposing, writing a memoir. In literary fiction, I've written a lot of myself. I've written a lot of the truth of myself, but you wrap it in fiction. You make it comforting in some way. And you hide yourself. You can bury yourself so you don't have to be and stand up and be so exposed. So I never intended to write a memoir. And in fact, I never really intended this initially when I was writing it to be shared. So I think if I had intended it to be read initially, I would have written it in a much more friendly way. The you, the second person, is very unfriendly. It's very kind of jarring. And I realized that, but it's because I was writing to myself and I was writing to my sister, and it's almost accusatory. I think I was quite angry with Kieran for dying, and I was speaking to her. And so the you was both to herself and to me, because I was in some ways trying to share and unspool my experiences, and in many ways I was kind of telling myself off through her. I think I felt quite haunted through the writing of this, and I know it's not, I say in the book, it's not pathological to see the dead for months after they've gone, because they are part of you. That's where they live. But I felt that you was a way of me kind of communicating with myself, with her, with our kind of joint common story, because I felt this was our story in some ways, this dealing with grief and bereavement, because what was a personal bereavement, what was my story and Kieran's story, actually became shared. It suddenly became everyone's story, because suddenly it wasn't just her death and my dealing with her death, it was everyone was dealing with death. At the end of this 40 days, there were 40,000 people dead in the UK from those first 4 that I mentioned in my trust on day 7. So death was all around. And I think I mentioned somewhere that the air was crackling with the expired electricity of it. It was always there. So it was our story, and that's why I felt okay to share it in a memoir.
Well, I'd just like to end by saying thank you so much for sharing it with us. It is an electrifying book, and I think it's profound and profoundly moving. And thank you for exposing yourself, for standing up in this way, because you have created something that is an important document, but it is also a work of art. And I recommend that everybody read it. Thank you so much, Roopa.
Thank you.